difficulties, but luckily we're all online and we are happy to have all of you attend our session. My name is Gordana Merchik and I'm the REAC for Central and Southern Europe. We're continuing with our professional development learning webinar series. There was a short break in August, but now we're picking up. And this is a topic that a lot of you have requested, which is how to assist your advisors who are interested in MBA programs. We have a speaker who is very much experienced in working with MBA students and admitting them at his campus. That is Mr. Blaine Hone from Stevens Henniger College. And some of the things that we'll talk about today are the things that you've shared with us that's what your students needed more help with. And those are how to guide them through the admissions process. So Blaine will give some tips on the admissions process, what the MBA application consists of. Then we'll talk about some funding possibilities besides family contribution that students provide on their own. What are some of the other options that they consider? We'll get to the main part of the presentation, which was something that, as I said, all of you expressed interest in, and that is work possibilities for international students. This is something that Stevens Henniger College has a lot of experience in, and Blaine will talk about how students go about finding a job, what are the support services they use, and then how do they go throughout their whole career using the alumni network available. Joining us today is also Nora. Nora Nemeth will be facilitating our webinar today, and she will be facilitating the Q&A. I would ask you to type your questions in the chat box, and we'll go back to them at the end of the presentation, or you can just speak up after we enable your microphone when we start the Q&A. Before we get started, I'm really delighted to have Blaine with us today. I just wanted to give you a short introduction of Blaine. He is the Director for International Programs at Stevens Henniger College in Salt Lake City, Utah. He has more than 15 years of senior leadership experience, having worked as the VP of Sales and Marketing in 2 different roles. Blaine is currently building and growing international programs for the Center for Excellence in Higher Education's consortium of private universities, where he recruits and manages marketing partners and leverages complex marketing campaigns around the world. Blaine holds an MA in Political Science and Executive MBA from Brigham Young University. Welcome, Blaine. We are really delighted to have you. Unfortunately, Blaine is calling in, so he won't be able to turn on his camera and you won't be able to see his face, but you'll be able to hear his voice. And now I'll pass it over to you, Blaine. Thank you for joining us. We'll hold the questions till the very end, and then we'll go ahead and start the Q&A. Thanks again, Blaine.
Well, thank you, Gordana, and thank you, Nora, both for your, I guess we'll call it hospitality and hosting this meeting, and for the invite. I am truly grateful for the opportunity. It's my pleasure to have a quick conversation. I did want to know, if you don't mind my asking, how many are on and what countries are represented as we're talking here. Is that fair for me to ask so that I can kind of tailor my conversation to the exact locations of where we're listening in from?
Sure. So we have 15 advisors. We have here Bosnia, Montenegro, Hungary, Slovenia. We have Belgium, Kosovo, Italy, Vilnius, I think, the Slovak Republic, and Nora, the countries that I'm missing? Can you help me with those? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think Poland as well, and someone from another region, the MENA region as well. Yeah, I think we have pretty much everyone, and hopefully we'll have more people join as well. And then if anyone could not make it to the session, we would like to share the recording with them, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I again appreciate the opportunity. And I lived for 2 years in Lithuania and traveled the Baltic states, so not too far from the region that you guys are located now. And so I appreciate the opportunity to present today. So right now, I'm showing on slide 1 U.S. MBA programs from the perspective of Stevens Henniger College. And I wanted to give a little more background as to where this perspective comes from. Stevens Henniger College was established more than 125 years ago in 1891. And at the time, we were conducting programs for offering credentials in secretarial work and bookkeeping. And it was, if you could put it this way, one of the earliest career schools, I think, in the country. We were focusing on what were the hottest career fields and making sure that our graduates from the programs that we offered, which at the time were not the same as the university programs from institutions like University of Utah or Brigham Young University, which were established at about the same time in Utah. Our programs were designed to create credentialing opportunities for students to expand their careers. So when I say that I'm giving MBA program information from the perspective of a career-focused school, that means that we, from the very inception of our institution, from the very beginnings, have had this focus on how do we help develop career outcomes for students. And that's the perspective from which we have built the programs that we do. Now, my knowledge base extends even a little beyond my experience with Stephen Henniger, in as much as I do travel quite a bit. I'm in several associations that give me access to what other schools are doing and understanding the programs as they exist from a perspective of a school in the United States, generally speaking. And so I'm going to
Okay. You should unmute. No, you should be okay.
Can you hear us,
Sounds
Blaine?
like conversations I had with you. Mom, you have to let go. Well, I can't go without the oxygen. Okay, first go grab the wood.
Hi, Blaine. Can you hear us?
You're late. Okay, guys. Keep focused on getting nothing more started. Especially you, Brent. Like, actually, I'm going to.
Blaine?
answering them in this slide. And if you can see on this, that's the third slide where it says key factors for application. The very first of the factors that I indicated as a key factor is program selection. So I know we're talking about MBA, but whenever you look at any graduate program, the reason why someone wants to attend a certain program is really critical for their own future. And that's something that I'm not sure students always take into account. A lot of times they're listening to advice from one or another source that says, hey, you should go to this school or you should take this program. And the only answer they have for why they're doing that particular program or attending that particular school is, someone told me this is a good place to go. And that's an okay starting point. I guess it really is. But when you get all the way through these key factors, you can see I've got program selection, previous education, test scores, transcript evaluations, letters of recommendation, resume, essay, and statement of purpose. The final one there being the interview. When you get to the interview and someone from the school is interviewing the candidate, the student, and they say, why did you select this particular program and our particular school? If they don't have an answer that's better than someone told me it might be a good thing, then they really are not as they aren't the candidate that most schools are looking for. A school really wants to hear that student has researched institutions, they've researched programs, and they selected something that they value as a student for furthering their own education and presumably their career after school. So among these others, let me just touch quickly on each of them. The previous education section, it is important that in the application process the student discloses what other degrees they've attended, and that's particularly interesting for students who may have completed some graduate level work, because in the previous education section, at some schools they may qualify for transfer credits, reducing the length and the cost of their program by transferring credit in from another school if they've done education at the level that they're applying to do education for. So that's something interesting to consider. Test scores, I've got a whole distinctive slide on that. And I'm going to go on and talk about that a little later, but that is one of the factors that you do want to make sure they're prepared on their application for. On transcript evaluations and transcripts and evaluations, some schools do and some schools don't require a third-party evaluation. But in every case, when someone submits a transcript from a foreign institution, it does need to be evaluated for credit as U.S. or for U.S. equivalency. And that's one of the requirements at most institutions for higher learning, that when we have admissions guidelines, such as that for example, in the master degree program, we have a guideline that says, or an admission requirement, that says that you have to have completed a bachelor degree. That bachelor degree must show a U.S. equivalency. And so third-party evaluation companies are one way that happens. The problem with those is that they're cost prohibitive for a lot of students. And it costs sometimes, well, I think the minimum amount I've ever seen on a third-party evaluation in one of the partners that we use is $75, and that's the very least amount that I've ever seen. The most expensive sometimes goes upwards of $300, depending on how quickly you need the evaluation completed. And so that's one of the things, though, that a lot of schools are shifting, in fact, to third-party evaluation companies, because it reduces the intake effort of the staff at the school to take care of. Let me move on. So letters of recommendation are critical for the application at the MBA level, because you'll need someone to verify that the student is indeed a candidate that someone else would recommend. We do read those carefully, and so that's something that when a student is getting a letter of recommendation, they make sure that the recommender is someone that they trust and that values their work ethic and their vision of success in an MBA program. Now, next in the list, I have resume. At our school in particular, because we're so career-oriented and we have an extensive work-study program, the resume is actually one of the most critical pieces, not necessarily for admission, but for our plan for how to help the student be successful at our school. So, and let me just give a little deeper background there. We offer what's called a CPT, or Curricular Practical Training Program, that I'll share more details on a little later on. But in order to facilitate that Curricular Practical Training Program, we need to place students with one of our partner employers. And in order to do that, understanding the student's resume is absolutely critical to the success of that placement process. And the sooner we have knowledge of the student and their background and their work history, the better off we are, even before they come. That's why we ask for the resume right up front at the very beginning of the application process. Now, a lot of schools ask for the resume because they need to verify that the student has the appropriate work experience necessary to enter their MBA program. At our school, we don't require a specific amount of work experience in order to be an MBA student, but that is one of the things that other schools do look at. So resume is very important. Finally, the essay and statement of purpose and interview, and I'll lump those all together as kind of the same comment here, where if a student doesn't have a very clear vision of where they're going and why they're attending the MBA, and if they don't have a very reasonable articulation of their work ethic and their confidence in being able to complete the entire program, then a lot of schools are very likely to deny the student entrance to their program. And so it's important that a student be able to articulate their interests and their abilities effectively through the essay, statement of purpose, and or interview process. So those are a few of the key factors for application at the MBA level. So moving on, let me just show you. The next question that we have in this first section about the schools generally is the standardized test scores. So what is the importance of standardized tests? What are the most common tests, and what can students do to prepare for them, and how common are those tests? And with that, I actually only prepared one slide to answer all 4 of those questions, but I'll speak to those questions as they relate to what I see as the most common of standardized tests. On the left side of the next screen that just says standardized tests, you'll see this little circle that has TOEFL and IELTS on one side and GRE and GMAT on the other. Now, the TOEFL and IELTS, I'm sure you all know, are English proficiency tests. For us at the MBA level, those are actually the most important test. GRE and GMAT are good to help evaluate the aptitude of a student who's going to be participating in their MBA program, in a school's MBA program. However, what we've found to be the very most important thing is, again, the essay and interview and the statement of purpose from the application process. And those skills, the ability to share that information in those parts of the application process, hinge very distinctly on a student's English abilities. And so on TOEFL and IELTS, if we look and they have a score that barely ekes over the requirement, then we anticipate, yes, we'll still count them as having met that requirement at our school, but it's something that we take into account very carefully, and we try and allocate the proper support for students who don't have higher English scores. Now, on GRE and GMAT, these 2 tests have been used traditionally for admission to graduate schools, but I've noticed a trend, and this is from my own perspective, and so, if there's data, otherwise I'm sure that the GRE and those, the testers of GRE and GMAT might disagree with me, but it sounds to me, at least subjectively, talking to my colleagues around the country, that these 2 tests and other similar standardized tests for aptitude are becoming less and less significant in the admission process. At our school, we've gone ahead and abandoned entirely the requirement that a student even take the GRE or GMAT. And so in terms of standardized tests, the only ones that we really are concerned with are TOEFL and IELTS. So when you look at these questions that we've asked, I'm just scrolling back up to the slide above, what's the importance of standardized tests? The answer to that is it really depends on the school and what the school is looking for. And what are the most common tests? Well, it's those 4 that I have listed below, the TOEFL and IELTS, and then GRE and GMAT. These are for graduate level. ACT and SAT, to my knowledge, aren't even really considered or important whatsoever at the graduate level. And then what can students do to prepare for these tests? That's a good question. There are a lot of prep centers around the world that have specialized in preparing students for these tests, and I would recommend that a student, if they are going to take GRE or GMAT, and if it is important and significant to the MBA school they're applying to, that they would go through a test prep program. Very much worth the money in order to land the school that you're hoping to, or to get the score that you're hoping to on those tests. And then how common are standardized tests? Again, my answer is I believe they're becoming less and less common, but they're still out there quite a bit. So let's move on to the final slide of this first section about the schools in general. It's the cost and funding slide. On mine, it's slide number 6. So we have the question here, on average, how much does an MBA degree cost? What are some of the ways that students can use to finance their studies besides personal funding? I'll scroll down to slide number 7, which just quickly gives some averages. And I know that there's a broad range of schools, but according to a couple of sources that I researched in preparation for answering this question, the national average for an MBA these days is $60,000. It's actually 60,000 or above is the typical answer for how much does an MBA cost. Now, with several, I think it's 2,000 or something accredited institutions of higher learning that are recognized by the Department of Education who offer MBA programs, this average certainly will have some that are much higher and some that are significantly lower. And so 60,000 is the national average. And for a top school, like an Ivy League school or a top 20 or top 50 school, typically students are paying upwards of $100,000 to attend the MBA program. Now, I put on here a third category of specialty schools, and this is where our school fits in, where we have this very distinct career-focused program that we offer students. There are other schools that have category-specific MBA programs, and they would qualify also as a specialty school. And these range greatly in their average MBA cost, from as little as $30,000, and I've seen some that are even slightly less expensive than that, to upwards of $120,000. And so that one's a hard one to say, here's the average for the specialty schools. Our school, we have targeted the demographic of students who want to who are looking for a work experience and will be paid through their time of attending school by their employer. And so we've actually we've targeted our tuition at the very lowest end here, and in fact we come in just under that $30,000 at $29,280 is the cost of tuition at Stevens-Henager College for the MBA school, or for the MBA program. I'm going to scroll down to the next slide now, slide number 8, the common MBA funding options. This is probably one of the most interesting conversations that we have with students, because a lot of them don't realize before or after they're starting classes with us that there are actually a pretty significant number of funding sources that students can receive. So first on that list is personal and family resources. Yep, just go to ask dad or your uncle, or maybe you've saved up, and ask someone with a big bank account to fund your college. Okay, so that's number one, and that's the least desirable for most people because it's money out of their own pocket. So let's look at number 2, the U.S.-based scholarship. There are actually a few different sources in the United States that students can receive a scholarship. The very first and easiest, I guess, for most international students to receive a scholarship would be from the very school that they're applying to. So at each school that a student makes application to, they should ask what the scholarship parameters are and whether or not they qualify for a scholarship, particularly an international student scholarship. Now, beyond the school itself, there are some funding institutions that are specifically created to help students, international students, receive an education and complete their work here in the United States. I know that even Sallie Mae and Freddie Mac, the big lending institutions here in the United States, had a program a couple of years ago I was aware of. I haven't seen students applying to it, so I'm not sure if it's still active, but they had a very specific foreign student scholarship program. In fact, I think they may have even had a grant program for students who could qualify for and demonstrate a significant financial need. So that's something to consider. There are also scholarship institutions that target students with specific demographics or backgrounds. So, for example, I know that we received scholarship funding from a Muslim student exchange or a Muslim student association that was specifically for Muslim students attending school in the United States. So that was something. So there are a variety of different demographics that have specific institutions designed for offering scholarships, from religious-based to regionally and country-based, and a variety of other things. And so we actually at our school have a big book of scholarships that foreign students come and peruse from time to time. In fact, we, in our orientation, encourage them to come check this book out and look for and apply to U.S. scholarships. And it's surprising how many people actually, I'll say, automatically qualify because they come from the demographic where there are institutions looking to give money to students to attend school from those demographics. So a bunch of U.S.-based scholarship opportunities. So I do encourage students to look beyond just asking their school if they have a scholarship program. Third, I guess, is the foreign scholarships. Same exact scenario for foreign scholarships. schools that a student graduates from sometimes have an international scholarship program where they'll help send a student to a foreign school. And then there are also government funding institutions from foreign countries. I know that particularly in Saudi Arabia, there is a large list of schools that are eligible for a full funding from the Saudi Arabian government for their students. So I do encourage students to check with their own countries and work with whatever with whatever college advisors they have access to ask about what in country, from their own country, scholarship opportunities they may have. And finally, corporate sponsorship is one that I don't think a lot of people consider. That's something that we as an institution with an intensive CPT, curricular practical training program, try and focus a lot on, where we try and find companies who are willing to actually sponsor the education of their students. And that can be a huge opportunity for both a company, a corporation, as well as the student who's attending or the employee of that corporation who wants to come get an MBA in the United States. And with the work-study opportunity that CPT offers, many times that corporation can benefit from having that employee work remotely here in the United States or at one of their branch offices that's nearby to our college or to the college that the student's attending, while still they can retain the employee while the employee goes ahead and gets their MBA. So that's something that is a unique and innovative funding source for some students. So let's move on to the next slide, and that kind of opens the next section. Actually, this one, slide 9, applicant work experience. It bridges the two sections that I wanted, that we're talking about here. The first being, what are the general policies and guidelines for application to U.S. MBA schools? The second being, what is this work-study thing that some MBA schools like ours are doing? And so I want to talk about the applicant's work experience. And these 4 questions: the previous work experience requirements, how common is it for the MBA program to admit students without work experience, and what is considered work experience? Does an internship count? I have in slide 10, I'll just move to that, I have a picture of a golden egg, and it says applicant work experience. The reason I put the little golden egg there is because, and this is maybe a shameless pitch for Stevens Henniger College, I believe that these uncommon requirements on work experience are at the core of a truly unique and golden opportunity for students. So the typical requirement on question 1 there is that most MBA schools require 1 to 3 years of experience. I would say on average it's 2 years. That's what I hear as a standard for applying to MBA school. You need 2 years of work experience in order to apply to our school. Now, the uncommon requirements, and that's these golden egg requirements, would have a school that says, you can start with either 0 years or as many years as you want, but there is no specific requirement for work experience. And the reason a school would do that is because they've built into their program an opportunity for work experience, and they actually get to train the student alongside the employer in the proper best practices of whatever their career field consists of. That way they're getting work experience that is integrated into their actual program, and they have a unique, hands-on work study opportunity. I've never seen a school, on this top point, I've never seen a school indicate that they require a maximum amount of work experience. Like, for example, you can't have more than X number of years work experience. Each institution I've ever seen is very happy to admit their more experienced students. So that's something to take into account. It's never too late to continue your education for someone who's already been working in field. The next question down, though, has to do with the students who have no work experience at all. And a lot of schools, again, that it relates to that first question. If a school requires 2 years work experience, then no, they would not admit a student who doesn't have any work experience. Where on the other hand, they would be admitted to these less common requirements where the work experience isn't required. So the third question down, professional employment, is typically related to the program. That answers the question about what kind of things count as work experience. In the uncommon schools, the golden egg schools, as I like to call them, work experience is gained during the MBA program via curricular practical training, or CPT, which we'll dive into right after this slide. And so that's kind of the process and the paradigm of these schools who aren't requiring work experience. Some of them don't have CPT programs and don't require work experience, but that's quite rare. And even at that, it's my personal opinion that a school that doesn't require work experience would be that it would be important for that school to somehow make sure that the student is acquiring the practical training and hands-on knowledge that an employer would expect someone to have as a Master of Business Administration graduate. So that final fourth point, internships may or may not count depending on the school. That's the school's requirement for work is really school specific, and so that's something that I can't answer for every school. I do know that at our school, internships and volunteer work do count if they're properly documented, and so that's something to encourage students as they're asking about volunteer work. They should definitely make sure that it's somehow documented, and they don't just present something that can't be substantiated or verified. So that's the work experience section. That brings us to the next slide, slide 11, practical work experience. Now we're diving into the next section of how do schools with CPT and the practical work experience function. And on this one, it says, how can international students gain practical work experience? Does your university assist them in this process, and where do they usually gain this work experience? How does it benefit them in the long run? The answer to these questions, let me just give that answer first, that international students can get practical work experience by doing what's called curricular practical training, or CPT. This is an engagement, a paid work engagement, a job with a partner employer. And I do recommend that you go to the ice.gov website and familiarize yourself with curricular practical training. In their search bar at ice.gov, you can just type in the word curricular practical training or simply CPT, and the very first link that pops up gives a bullet point list of all the parameters of CPT, some of which are very, it just simply says that a school may offer CPT and that they can offer CPT. There's a bullet point that says that if the school requires CPT early on in their study, in the student's program, then they can allow it even in the first semester. And there are a few other bullet points in there. But the long and short of CPT is that it must be integral to the program of study. So the job can't just be working at a gas station or serving food at a restaurant. The job itself has to be integrated to the MBA program. So that means that they must be working somewhere where they can practice the skills of business administration. So we make sure that when a student applies for CPT, the job description and the employer they're working with match the curriculum and the program that they're working in. So and the reason I'm being a little bit general, and I'm not just saying MBA, is that we also offer similar programs for Master of Healthcare Administration and Master of Information Systems. But since this is an MBA specific conversation, I'll tailor the talk to that. But as far as assisting the students, the answer is yes, we absolutely assist students in the process of finding their CPT job by, first of all, partnering with other employers and making sure that the employers have agreements on board with Stevens-Henniger College to be our CPT employment partner. But secondly, by engaging with those employers on a regular basis to find out what jobs are available to our students and then passing that information on to the students. We also conduct a significant amount of training for our students in CPT to help them understand how to write a resume and how to actually land the job, because at the end of the day, we don't call an employer and say, okay, we got another one, plunk them in, and then the employer just employs the student. There's the full interview process where they have to go and acquire the job themselves, which the job getting skill is in itself a pretty substantial and important skill for the MBA students. And so that's something that we're proud to offer them. And where do they usually gain this work experience? The answer is that they work with our employment partners. As I just mentioned, we have a variety of different companies that the students work with. On slide 12, I've moved down, it says practical experience opportunities. The opportunities, generally speaking, can be an on-campus job. That's where, at most institutions, especially the ones that don't have CPT, the only work opportunity for a student is whatever job is available on campus. During studies, curricular practical training is available for those who allow it and who have built in CPT into their program. And then after they've completed studies, the optional practical training is an opportunity for other students. Other than these three sources of practical experience, I'm not aware of where else a student would get practical experience except for working illegally, which is never advised. And so it's really a big deal, I think, to have a CPT program available for students. I've moved down to the slide number 13, career placement resources. And I mentioned briefly that we do have in addition to these three resources, we do have partnerships with the employers. But we have career training, we have CPT placement staff, and we have accountability systems built in where on a weekly basis, we help monitor a student who has not yet been placed for CPT. We monitor their activity levels and the different things that they're pursuing, the interviews that they're having, and we follow up with and make sure they're getting placed with employers. But I wanted to get to that very last question. What is the long-term aspect and what's the benefit of doing CPT? And the next slide number 14, really kind of answers that. It also answers the question of where are these guys working. So these logos that you see on this slide number 14, are just a few of the companies that I hoped you might be familiar with that some of our MBA students are working with. We have business analysts working for Goldman Sachs. We have banking and investment banking in particular folks working at Wells Fargo. We have we have one MBA professional working in accounting at the company Tesla, which is the electric car manufacturer who has a big corporate presence here in Utah. And we have, I think, 5 MIS students, Master Information Systems students, working there as engineers. And then Unishippers is one of my favorite employer partners. They have a program where they guarantee not a student, but whoever starts in their career path, that within 3 years, their employee can be earning upwards of $100,000 if they maintain a certain career path. And we place some students in that. That does assume that Unishippers would ultimately be sponsoring an H-1B visa or something like that. But that's one of the things that we really like. Either sponsoring an H-1B visa or sending them to one of their foreign locations, because Unishippers is a global logistics company. So that's an interesting career path partner that we have. So on all these cases, the bullet points there is that we do work in partnership with them. Some of them have a planned career path, and with all of them, the job that the student is working as part of their CPT is integrated into their training program in a big way. And so that final question, how could this be a benefit to someone's long-term career outcomes? We think it's huge to be able to come back from an MBA and say, not only did I get the degree, but I now have 1 year of work experience with one of the countries or maybe one of the world's great companies in this or that field, whatever it is. That we think is absolutely invaluable, priceless to employers whenever they want to employ a fresh graduate from an MBA program. So we think that's very helpful. Okay, the last little section here on slide 15 talks about career placement. It says, what are some of the career events we plan for our students and how important is the alumni network? So I'm moving down to slide 16 that answers that, where we talk about career-centered placement. In the left window, you see this little ladder with networking, skills matching, writing power statements, written materials, and interviews. This is actually taken from the curriculum of our what we call Workshop 01. It's the very first workshop, and it's an orientation class on CPT that we put all of our students through. And so in addition to that class, we have career fairs. We have an alumni network that is indeed very active and very important to the placement of our students. We have staff in place who are making regular contact with our employer partners and coaching each of the students. And we have a student success center that is actually a place for students to come and study and work on job leads and be diligent in reaching their goals of being placed in the first 30 days for a CPT program. That's at least what our institution does for CPT placement, and that goal, the goal of being placed within 30 days, is something we take very seriously. The maximum is 90 days. We put the impetus on our staff to place each student within 90 days of their arrival in the program, and so that's something that we take very seriously. And CPT, being such a significant part of our operation, is given a great deal of focus by a number of people at our institution. So let me move to the next slide. These are, in addition to 17 outreach career placement, in addition to the things that we do at the school, we've got the outreach side. And this is where I talked about making these partnerships with our employment partners, signing agreements with them, and then making sure that the students have interviews. And the way I've articulated it in this slide is that it is indeed a cycle where we work with employers and then bring them back to the students and then push the students back to the employers and go in this cycle until we have all of our students placed. And it works very well as a system for placing all our students. The final point that I wanted to address is the programs, the very specific programs here at Stevens-Henager College. So slide number 18. What's the profile of an MBA student here at Stevens-Henager, and what's unique about our programs that's important for an EducationUSA advisor to know? Slide 18 kind of goes through all of that information. And I have been, in this last section, talking a great deal about this CPT program. To my knowledge, there are actually very few schools in the United States that offer them. I have a list of schools that offer similar CPT programs as Stevens-Henager does, and even at that, they ebb and flow. So, for example, instead of offering CPT from the very beginning, one of my close contacts at one of the largest schools in the United States, Northeastern University in Massachusetts, they offer CPT after the first academic year, and then it's only a six-month stint of CPT. So the student goes to school for one academic year, works in CPT for 6 months, and then comes back and completes their second academic year. So at Stevens-Henager, we, from the very beginning, are placing students within the first 90 days and having them work. And the reason we can do that kind of a program is that we offer our classes in the evening. So starting at 6 p.m., 6 to sometimes 10 p.m., just depending on the class, 2 nights a week, our students are attending class in the evening. That opens up their availability to work all throughout the day. The other thing that's very unique about Stevens-Henager College is that we do a modular start. So we teach one subject for one module or 1 month, and then we move to the next subject the next month. And so that makes it possible for us to have what we call a rolling start. Instead of just starting courses or starting programs in September and January, like most schools, we'll actually do a start every single month of the year. And so that's a very unique and interesting advantage for students in particular who urgently want to start school or need flexibility in when they're available to start their program. So as far as the student profile, to answer that quickly, our graduate level students, well, first of all, at the international level, we typically only have graduate level students. We don't bring in a lot of bachelor degree or associate degree students who are from foreign countries. And that has mostly to do with the very specific work-study program that we've built and engaged the international community for programs at the graduate level. And that makes the average age 28 to 35. And I know that's a big range. It really just depends on the cohort of students that are going through at any given time. It kind of varies. But as you can see, it is a little higher age than I think most schools, because at that age 28 or so, students are valuing the work experience very significantly, and that's why they're typically coming to our school. And then the common work experience, like as a profile, I would say that most of our students do have at least 2 years, but it really is a broad range of students that we have that are here. And so they may have as much as 10 years work experience. And by the way, the CPT program, or the job that they're placed in during their program, depends on their work experience. The higher level of work experience they have back home, the higher level of job they would receive here. So if you're an entry-level student, you're probably going to receive an entry-level job with entry-level pay, which is still a good opportunity, but it just is something that that students should be aware of when they come. The one thing that all of our students have in common is they're very strongly career focused. They're very interested in getting a credential that advances their career. The CPT programs that we offer and the careers that students will grow in at our school are business, healthcare, and information systems. And we have a master's degree associated with each of those schools that we operate at Stephen Tenneger College and the rest of the Center of Excellence in higher education schools. But that's us in a nutshell. I'm very proud of what we offer. I'm very proud of the career advancement opportunities that we bring to students from all over the world. And so I look forward to your, pushing whatever information on to whatever students you interact with. I hope that this has been helpful. And with that, I guess I'll move to the slide number 20 that asks us if there are any questions. I'm very happy to entertain them.
Thanks so much. This was a really useful presentation. We got to see a very good overview of the MBA process, and I think you raised two very good points here. The first one is how specific students should be in tailoring their application. There are some students who are really heavy on the testing, but as you mentioned, for your particular institution, that's not the GRE and the GMAT, which are sometimes the most challenging tests for students to take. They're not as important for your institution. And I think that the second question that you raised, which is really, really useful for all advisors to hear, is that students can come in with no working experience, but then build it because the program provides such opportunities for them, as in the case with your school, where you have them do a CPT training even within 90 days once they get started. So I think those are the most important takeaways that our advisors can take from the presentation. And we have a couple of questions here. If everyone else, feel free to either raise your hand or to add additional questions in the chat box. But I'll start off with our Polish advisor's question. She wanted to know, you already gave examples of the type of job students do throughout their MBA program, but she wanted to know what the workload is. Do they find it overwhelming to work at the same time while they're studying, or is it a well-balanced approach that you have at your university?
That is a great question. We count ourselves, let's see, I'm going to use a term here that doesn't specifically apply to us because we do have academic requirements that a student meet. But if you're familiar with the term open enrollment school, an open enrollment school is one that basically admits a student, any student who says, yes, I want to go to the school and I want to pursue courses that don't necessarily lead to graduation. We are not a quote unquote open enrollment school. We have academic requirements and we insist that our students are dead set on graduating the program that they begin. Now, the reason I bring up the enrollment is that despite the fact that we are not an open enrollment school, we do have fairly minimal academic requirements. A student into our MBA program only needs to have reached a 2.5 out of a 4-point scale GPA in their undergraduate work. They must have a TOEFL score of 79. Actually, I think we recently revised that and lowered it to 71, or an IELTS score of 6.0. So in any case, the entry requirements, those two entry requirements, along with the financial backing necessary to cover the cost of their program and living expenses and being able to demonstrate that those are actually the only real requirements in order to enter our school. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because we still count ourselves a very rigorous institution. We have a difficult course of study, and the difficulty is built in not on the academic side like Harvard or Stanford, who make their classes as difficult and rigorous academically as they can to maintain that reputation for academic rigor. But our rigor comes from requiring that our students participate in a full-time workload. If you look at the CPT curriculum, the requirement for the course, the CPT course that is built in for credit at the school, the student, in order to receive 100% of the grade available for CPT, would require that they attend over, I think it's 1,000 hours, or anyway, it equates to working full-time for about 11 months. And so full-time would be from 8 in the morning till 5 at night, 5 hours a week. And then they would attend classes from 6 to 10. So out of respect for the workload itself that a student is going to be having in their employment and their CPT part of the work, our instructors tailor their courses in such a way that they build upon what's happening at the job. So they make it so that it's not too much of a redundancy, but they are getting the academic side of the MBA program. I know this is a long answer to what seemed like a short question, but the summary is, yes, it is very rigorous in terms of the workload that a student will have, but the homework assignments that a student is asked to do and the amount of research from the coursework side associate so closely with the job itself that they can often complete it in a very, well, I won't say a very short amount of time, but in an amount of time that is proportionate to the time that we know they'll have available to study. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's a heavy workload, but yes, it's something that students do manage quite well. Let me also tell a statistic here that kind of verifies what I'm saying, that I'm actually quite proud of, that our graduation rate for these master level classes is actually well above 90%. I believe it was 94 last time I looked, and maybe it had dipped down to 92. But we have one of the highest graduation rates for a school of our kind, I think, in the country. So that's the reason I bring that up, is because it tells me that yes, it's a heavy workload, requiring a student to work full time, 8 to 5, and then go to class 2 nights a week from 6 to 10. But despite it being a heavy workload, we're having phenomenal success with those who participate in the program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Blaine. And is there like an average time that students graduate from your school?
Yes, the program is 15 months, and it's a quote-unquote lockstep program. So once you enter the program, you're on a wheel to complete the program in 15 months, and that's not just an average. It's pretty much what every student does. Now, the only exception to that is when a student puts the program on pause and travels to their home country for oftentimes a family emergency, or sometimes simply to take a break. But there are no breaks built into the program. It's 15 months consecutively, and that's usually the time frame in which students complete the MBA program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'll just go ahead. We have about 2 minutes left. So if any of the advisors have any additional questions to ask, feel free to type them in the box or to enable your microphone. So we'll wait a little bit to see if any other questions are coming up. This is a recorded presentation, so you can refer to it anytime as you please. And we do have Blaine's contact details in the presentation. So if you want to follow up with him and ask him anything about his institution, you are more than welcome to do so. Trying to scroll down to see if any other questions are coming up. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I just want to ask you, Blaine, since you mentioned that students need to have very clear career goals before they start their MBA program, would you encourage them to approach institutions and ask them where their students usually do their OPT and CPT? Would this be useful for them to know in advance, even before they apply?
I'll answer that a little more broadly than just that question. I think any engagement with an institution before they apply is very valuable, not just to the student, but to the institution. To let that institution know, even if all you get is a someone not very high up, maybe not even the person that you would be doing the interview with, but someone who can give you some advice on the institution, and then reference that in interviews and statements of purpose. That goes a long way for a student to get admission to the institution of their choice. But yeah, the very short answer is yes. That is something I would recommend, that they get a feel for what that institution produces as far as students are concerned. Let me just say real quick that this is something I've, this is a philosophy, I guess, that I got from our college president. She once told me, actually I've heard her say it a few times, that our customer, if you look at things from an industry perspective, and that's where I came from. I've only been 5 years in international education, but before that I was in international business development. And if you look at a school as a manufacturer, the product that we're producing is actually the student. The customer is the employer. And I know I don't want to sound terse or disrespectful of students, but I would hope our students appreciate that as much as we're trying to facilitate an education and service their needs, they are not our quote unquote customer. Our customer that we're servicing is the industry that those students are going to go work in. They're going to go play a part, and we are proud of helping them become what the industry needs and what our employers would be looking for. And so that's something that's the perspective from our school that I think a student would be wise to consider, really at any school. What kind of product will I become by attending this school, and where will I be valued, is an extraordinary question that they should be considering from all sources, be that the institution itself or other people who know.
Thank you, Blade. This is a great note to wrap up our presentation with, how the employer and the employee should actually be a perfect match, and how your institution helps them achieve that. I think this was a fabulous presentation with lots of great ideas shared with the advisors. I'll encourage them to get in touch with you with any additional questions. And I want to thank you so much for your time. I know that it's early in Salt Lake City, so we appreciate you joining us on early Wednesday morning. Thanks everyone for attending the webinar.
Been my pleasure, truly. Thank you for the opportunity, and I sincerely echo the comment you made of being accessible, and I'm very happy to talk directly one-on-one with anyone that has questions about what we've presented here. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Blaine. We appreciate your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be in touch about October's webinar, and thanks Nora for helping us facilitate today's session. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.